in the eastbound lanes. You can see that all of our signings and markings are in order. All the delineators are present. We've gone through and touched up the numbers here. The stripes and crosses are in pretty good shape. We've lost a little bit, but for the most part it's still there. I'm going to go back here and show you the back of our sharp sign. You can see where they've done an inlay right up to the edge of our test section and then stopped. And our traffic monitoring installation. There is also a WIM installation that has been made. It is near this site. It is not immediately adjacent to it. It's adjacent to section 485323, which is about 10 miles down the road from this section, but for the most part it will provide WIM data comparable to that traveling over this section. Excuse me. By that I mean that there are no real traffic generators between here and there. There are some interchanges for some FM roads, and I believe one state highway, a small state highway, but I don't think any of those are major truck generators. You can see most of the traffic here is going from Amarillo across to Oklahoma. I'm going to go ahead and walk through this section. We are in Carson County. You will note that this particular stretch of I-40 does have a considerable amount of distress. Some of the things that I've noted as extending throughout the test section, you can see there is a crack running along the center line throughout the test section. There is also a fairly significant amount of, I've labeled it as raveling and weathering. I'm not sure exactly what it's the exact result of, but running right down the middle of the lane, it's fairly rough and pitted, and I've tried to document that as best I could. I said about 2 feet wide throughout the entire test section. Looking at it, you'd say, well, it looks like it's alligator crack, but when you get right on top of it, it's just that rough and that pitted that there's no cracks, just very, very rough texture to it. There is quite a bit of alligator cracking on this test section. It just does not happen to be occurring down the center of the lane. You can see we have some fairly severe transverse cracks. I believe I've labeled this one as moderate severity. You can see all of the random cracking adjacent to and associated with this crack. Some of these have been fairly well sealed, like this one here, this little one, and the center line is pretty well sealed. Some of the cracks are still fairly open. Here you can see some of the alligator cracking beginning to develop in here. There's a pretty well defined pattern. Not too much sprawling. But definitely alligator cracked. Again, the transverse crack, which is, I don't recall exactly what I labeled this one, either be low or moderate severity, depending on how one considered this section here with the random cracking associated with it. You can see there's a little bit of this crack here seems to encircle some of the alligator cracking, but the alligator cracking does tend to continue on. We do every once in a while get a longitudinal crack running down the center here. A lot of transverse cracks extending partially through the section. Most of the alligator cracking noted on this section was in the inside lane. The transverse crack. You can see again we pick up the longitudinal crack down the center line, or down the center of the test section. Transverse crack again running off of it. Again, some of these have at least been sealed once. They are still fairly moderate severity. Station 2. Again, looking at the center of the lane, you'd think that there was alligator cracking down it, when in fact it's just a considerable amount of raveling and weathering. That we do, however, have some alligator cracking again in the inside wheel path. Station 3. Thought I might have one of those. There was a cluster of transverse cracks like that had quite a bit of alligator cracking associated with it. Again, you can see we pick up the longitudinal crack on the center line. Have a fair amount of alligator cracking associated with this crack here. Again, some more alligator cracking associated with the transverse crack. A little bit of longitudinal cracking down the center line. Here you can see we pick up, again, some alligator cracking. It's very sporadic. It's not consistent through the section, but appears to be primarily associated with the any cracks in the surface that have allowed water to intrude. It's kind of interesting to note in the adjacent lane how deep some of those cracks have gotten. I don't know if they've lost some of the surface there or exactly what's happened. Looks like we have the makings of some of that in our section. You can see here a moderate severity transverse crack that's starting to deteriorate pretty rapidly. Again, this is Interstate 40. We're in the eastbound lanes, about half an hour east of Amarillo. Another moderate severity transverse crack. All the delineators are present, markings and Signs are all present and accounted for. Looking out to the east, you can see our test pit there, and on down the road a ways we'll go and look at our two experiment 5 test sections east of us here. Looking back over the test section, again you can get a pretty good idea of the amount of cracking present. The alligator cracking isn't quite as noticeable as the transverse and longitudinal cracking that they've sealed for us here. With that, that should conclude the video here for section 48, 1046. 5323